Hello, I'm Jaclyn Kim, and today we're going to be discussing vibrato. There are two main types of vibrato, wrist vibrato and arm vibrato. I personally use arm vibrato a lot more, but generally speaking, if you're using one type of vibrato, wrist vibrato, you're still going to be using some of your arm. And if you're using arm vibrato, you're still going to be using some of your wrist to do it. The main sound vibrato comes from is your very first joint of your finger flattening and coming back. So if you're ready to do vibrato and you want to learn vibrato, you have to make sure that your fingertips are always on their tippy toes. They're always very curved. If you have flat fingers, you won't be able to do vibrato because you'll have no space to travel. When you're doing arm vibrato, you want to make sure that the inside of your forearm feels like it's going back, and then it will return to the original position. So have your fingers curved over like you were on a fingerboard, and just go back and forth until that feels comfortable. When you actually apply this to the violin, you may have some wiggle in your wrist, and that's fine. You should be loose. You shouldn't ever feel tight. Try to relax your muscles as much as possible. Then you can apply that same exercise but to the neck of the violin. So I'm not pressing down with my fingers, I'm hovering them on top of the strings without pressing down. And I'm just going back and forth like if you were going from first to third position. And you want to make sure that your thumb is falling along, hugging the neck without pressing. You don't want to let go of the neck, and you don't want it to go at a different speed. Exact same speed. If you have a friend or a student, try doing this exercise with them. So you want to make sure that their wrist is nice and loose and flexible, ready for vibrato. Good. And always have them in playing position. And then also see if the wrist is loose by making their forearm go back and forth. The next exercise you can do is knocking against a wall. So you want to take your arm, your forearm, and lean it up against the wall, and you're going to knock backwards to get the correct motion for vibrato. I'm going to slow down my vibrato to show you what it looks like physically and what it sounds like. So you can see that my finger starts in a very curved position. I bring my arm back, the finger flattens, and I bring my finger back, my arm back. Vibrato is another color we can add to our music. It helps us make our music more interesting. And vibrato is also unique to each person because all our finger sizes are different. So some people have very wide pads to their finger, and some people have very pointy, skinny fingers. So vibrato is going to sound different on each person. There is wide vibrato, and there is narrow vibrato, and there's fast vibrato, and there's slow vibrato. And then you can combine any of these to make vibrato as well. When the music is a little bit more intense, sometimes we use a faster vibrato. And sometimes when the music is a little bit more calm, we can use a slower vibrato. I'll be showing you the 4 different types of vibrato that I discussed earlier: narrow versus wide, slow versus fast, and try to see if you can hear the difference between the 4. If you feel comfortable with the exercises we worked on earlier, going back and forth between first and third position with your fingers on the string, making sure you have that flexible wrist, and also applying that to the violin, flexible wrist while moving the arm backwards. then you are ready to start putting down individual fingers and pulling back your arm, flattening the knuckle, and then going back to the original spot. It's best to do this with your other fingers also hovering the strings but not touching them. You don't want your fingers back here where your palm is facing your nose, because then the motion will become distorted. Make sure your palm is always facing the fingerboard. You'll need some flexibility right here, so make sure that there's a tiny bit of space in between your finger, where your palm starts, and the neck of the violin. If you have a bigger hand, you may hit your E string peg, and that's okay. You can even think of it as a target. Just make sure that you don't overextend your wrist, because that's going to become an issue, and you never want to have your wrist like this. If you're not comfortable holding your violin with your chin and your shoulder, vibrato's going to be a little bit difficult for you, because you won't be able to support your violin only with your hand. You have to be able to support your violin with your shoulder and your chin. When your first finger feels comfortable, try second finger. I personally like to keep my first finger down. It's kind of like extra exercise for the first finger, but you don't need to. You could lift the first finger. Then third finger, and fourth finger. Remember that vibrato comes from the flexibility of this first joint. If you have double jointed fingers, you won't be able to flex that joint anymore. So try your best to keep this relaxed and keep your pinky nice and curved. So if you can take your finger on top of your thumb and flex it back and forth, and make sure that your finger is nice and flexible and can easily move. You don't need to press, it's just moving your finger back and forth. And then pinky can be a little bit more difficult, a little more challenging. Now, some people have hypermobility fingers, which means double jointed fingers, like that's called swan. When you're a swan finger is when your finger is flexed and you can bend the top of it. So when you're playing, you want to play at the tips of your fingers. Extend your hand back so that the finger becomes flat on the string, and then forward again in its original position. With pinkies, a lot of times you'll see the pinky straight right here and curved at the tip, like this. Now, if that happens, it's very hard to do vibrato, since vibrato comes from the flexibility of this joint. I have seen some people able to still flex their pinky with that double jointed, but I personally cannot. Since my pinky is double jointed as well, I've learned to train to hook my pinky like this and keep it like that, and when I vibrato, I can just flex this knuckle back and forth. Since my fingers are double jointed, I can't approach my violin with my pinky with a straight pinky. If I have a straight pinky, then my pinky will become locked. So I have to hook my pinky like this in a C, and when I lift my pinky, it stays in the C, and when I put down my pinky, it stays in the C. If I lift it up like this and put it down, it will be locked in this hypermobile form, and then I won't be able to do vibrato. Make sure when you're practicing your vibrato, you stay very loose and relaxed. Make sure you're not gripping your violin very tightly with your hand, and you're not overly pressing down your string. You just want to pinch your string until you feel the fingerboard. If you squeeze too much and you try to vibrato, a lot of times you'll see the violin shake. If you're loose enough, the violin will stay still. Vibrato is kind of a hard thing to teach because it's very much a feeling. Some people talk about a natural vibrato, and they're talking about someone who naturally feels vibrato. It's okay if you don't naturally feel it. It's a strange feeling. If you're still stuck on the first few exercises we worked on earlier in this video, don't give up. They'll become easier, and the more you do it, the better you'll get at it, I promise. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any more vibrato questions, feel free to comment down below. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you next Monday.